Okay. Welcome to New Realities. This is Alan Steinfeld, and this is part of an ongoing series I've been doing every Wednesday night, if you've been paying attention, called ET Roundtable. And it's a discussion with many people who are experiencers, many people, researchers, people just curious about what's happening. But we have a very special guest today who's has an exo studies consciousness course, and my friend Nadi Hanna is going to do the introduction and do like a kind of brief interview so we can get into the flow here. Nadi, please go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. It's so good to be here and with all this amazing crew. And I'm super excited and honored that Sean is joining us today. And I'll try to keep it short, but I really could go on for a long time about how amazing he is and how much fun it's been to be in a year-long course that he has led this past year. We finished up in August. Court was actually a fellow traveler in that process. So Sean is a pioneer, and I've been really inspired by his work, which is really an extraordinary integral meta view of the exo reality. And saying that, that's a lot to unpack. So he put together this year-long course, and he has this, you call it the Exo Studies, the Institute of Exo Studies. We'll get it right. Yeah, but the year-long program was marketed as the sociological, psychological, and scientific implications for living in a multidimensional multiverse. Right. Like, I hope I got that right. Sean, did I get that right? There's so much to say. We covered so much about like non-consensus reality. It was 42 weeks of extraordinary topics. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. Highly recommend looking into his work. And the thing, I'm leaving out so much. Like, Sean, I hope we get into your projects and the things that you're going toward working on, and that's really exciting. But the thing that also got me is that I first heard you on Aliens and Artists, which is Stuart Davis's podcast. Right. And you were talking about your experience with the manted beings. Yep. And I was hearing you talk about this wonderful academic interpretation perspective, and also a really embodied perspective, and also a real heart space. You hold so many different energies, and it's really inspiring. And to hear you talking about your manted, your off-planet and ET experience, it just really rounded out the package. And I was like, I want to spend more time with that guy. He knows what he's doing. And then I wanted to really bring you on the call today so that more people could know about the awesome things that you're doing. And I think what I want to do is just like let you say a couple of things about the amazing projects that you have going, because I can't possibly cover the breadth. There's so much. And welcome and thank you for being here. I think it's going to be a good time.
Thanks, Nadi. It's great to be here. And thanks, Alan, for just hosting us. And Court, one of my dear friends, and who's also been in the year-long Exo Studies course. Good to have you here. And Kat, nice to meet you. And Elizabeth, who was one of my graduate school teachers back in the day. So wonderful to have her and Michael. So really excited to dive in. Yeah, Alan?
I'm not just thinking maybe, some people are born connected to the ETs, but other people, it slowly hits them like, oh my God, there's something more going on. Do you want to talk about your process a little bit?
Yeah. I'll dive in there. I'll say a little bit, kind of use that as an on-ramp into some of what I'm currently doing, and then we can kind of go wherever any of you want to explore.
Right, and talk about your course, which sounds really fascinating, and your not just your course, but your conclusions or speculations about the whole, because there's something going on here, and we don't know what it is. All right, go ahead.
No, totally. Yes. Ever since I was young, was very interested in everything, as many of us are when we're little, nothing was off the table, so I had a very curious mind, and I've always been kind of intellectually driven, kind of a strong mental type, and, interested in theories, models, maps. And I've always had kind of a holistic, transpersonal, kind of integrative mode as well. I didn't have any notable experiences when I was young that I recall, but, now where I'm at, I'm learning more about, some of those early experiences that might have been occurring, as I kind of piece, the puzzle together, as it were. I've always been very spiritually oriented, always been drawn to, the mystical paths. When I was, in high school, I was involved in more extracurricular activities than anyone that the principal of the school had ever seen in the history of his tenure as principal. Right. And so I think why that's interesting is just, I think it points to, at that early age, I just was hungry for connecting with reality, right? And just wanted to be involved with all the sports and all the after school clubs and all the activities, right? It's just, there was this insatiable desire to connect, explore, and, talk with people. And then, I went to college and there, I really, it was just like mind candy, extraordinaire. It's like, I ended up taking so many classes in my 4 years there that I graduated with 6 years of classes in a 4-year period. So I managed to squeeze 2 extra years into my 4 years. And it's
where did you grow up and go to college? Where were you from?
I grew up on the West Coast. I was born in Washington, near, Shelton, Washington, on the Olympic Peninsula. I grew up in Coos Bay, Oregon, and then I went to school at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, which is kind of right on the border between Washington and Oregon. And then I ended up going to grad school at the California Institute for Integral Studies, which is where Elizabeth and I connected. So I tried to triple major, which was just kind of insane. And I decided to go on an overseas program to Kenya. And that actually prevented me from triple majoring, because that choice prevented me from getting the additional credits I needed. Even though, I had, 6 years of courses in 4 years, I was very close to triple majoring. I was trying to triple major in philosophy, biology, and psychology, because I was studying animal consciousness. And I was really interested in consciousness and what can we and can't we say about our sentient, brothers and sisters on the planet. And, so that was really kind of the beginning of my interdisciplinary, integrative exploration of consciousness, but I was focused on animals and plants. Then I went to Peace Corps and went to Chad, worked in water and sanitation, building latrines across the landscape with the UN and other NGOs. And while I was there, I had a lot of time to read. So I read over 200 books in, a wide range of domains. So again, the mind was just how do I make sense of this crazy world? Philosophy, religion, psychology, literature, paranormal studies, everything I could get my hands on in Africa. Whenever new Peace Corps volunteers, came, it was what books did you bring? I would often read their books before they read them. It's give me that. I've read all my stuff. I want to read your stuff. And that's where I came across the work of Ken Wilber. And when I read Ken's books, it just blew me away. All of a sudden I had an integral framework to hold all of this content that I'd been pouring into my head, for, at this point, 6 years. So 4 years of college trying to triple major, 2 years in Peace Corps, reading all these books. I mean, it's just I couldn't get any more knowledge in there. It was just overflowing. And all of a sudden I had this integral framework that helped me get a meta view on it, helped me see the ways it might be related. And it just, I had what I call a intellectual satori. I had this, kind of this mystical experience that was knowledge driven. It's kind of if you go deeply into anything, it's kind of you pop out on the other side, right? And so there I was. And so I had been planning on getting a PhD in the philosophy of biology. With Wilber's work, I shifted and I became interested in human consciousness in general, right? So that's why I went to CIIS, the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program, which again, it's those are all the big questions, philosophy, cosmology, consciousness, right? And yet, interestingly, side note, no discussion of ETs, no discussion of UFOs in that program. And that wasn't so much on my radar. so there I was, doing all my spiritual practices, doing all my California retreats, and, having different experiences. And
I just want to say one thing. It's interesting. Wilbur, in his worldviews, never actually goes off planet. We go from cities to countries to the globe. And I did ask him, well, Ken, the next step is globes, planets, isn't that the next integral base? And he said, well, maybe. And then he said, you sort of look like an ET, but that's all he said to me. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, it's perfect. And Court knows this very well as also, because we've talked a lot about it. My dissertation was on integral ecology, and it was really looking at like, how do we develop a planet-centric approach to our cosmic story? And in that dissertation, and that which later became a book called Integral Ecology, I identified 200 different schools of ecology and environmental thinking. There's actually 80 schools of scientific ecology, and I mapped those out and I defined them, and each of them have their own PhD programs, their own journals, their own conferences. And then there's 120 schools of thought, environmental thinking, like deep ecology, ecofeminism, so forth and so on. So at that point, I'm still, it's like, I have this meta mind. It's like, how do we bring all this onto the same table, and how do we connect it? And if we're going to save the planet, shouldn't we be talking with all these different approaches? Because the population ecologists do not talk to the behavioral ecologists, who do not talk to the community ecologists, who do not talk to the evolutionary ecologists, right? Like, no one's talking to each other, right? It's like what's going on? This is crazy. We need to, coordinate our wisdom and bring it together. And, so as I graduated, and then I became the chair of two graduate programs at John F. Kennedy University in the Bay Area. I was an online program for integral theory, and then a campus-based program for integral psychology. So, I was really teaching people how to apply these integral models and frameworks to a variety of domains. I became very interested in nature spirits and elemental beings, and just kind of the different kinds of intelligences associated with the natural world. And that was kind of like this secret that I had, during all my graduate school, time of like, this was something, because, it's not something you really talk about in a, Wilbur context,
Right.
He makes room for it, but
there's no place in the quadrants for
right.
the fairies.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I was at a choice point with that, where I was like, okay, I'm just going to go into this full on for 10 years. I'm going to do the practices associated with these traditions. I'm going to see what's revealed to me in my own experience and awareness. And I'm going to kind of bracket my card carrying Wilberian, orientation, and I'm just going to give this a chance, because there was just a really strong soul impulse of like, this is important. I need to follow this thread. Well, the more I went into the earth, right, into the subtle realms, into the different kinds of intelligences that are part of our natural systems, the more I did that, the more I kept popping out into the galactic. And that was initially confusing to me. And because if you talk to the people who experience and work with those intelligences, generally speaking, they're not interested in ETs, right? If you go and talk with the people who have encounter experiences with extra dimensionals or extraterrestrials or other kinds of galactic intelligences, they're often not that interested in nature intelligences, or, so it was confusing, and it was hard to find myself in that, because I was having experiences of both. So
I just want to say, Kat is someone I don't know that well, but started in that kind of psychic, intuitive world, and is now, I would say, graduating, Kat, to the ET stuff.
Yeah.
But what would you
I
say?
think so. Absolutely, because again, we're multidimensional, and so you get kind of drawn into different directions. But by the time that I'm much more. I've always, again, I don't want to take the show here, but I just
Please.
knowing that there was always something more out there anyway. But I didn't, it wasn't something that I dove deep into as far as ETs or even UFOs or anything like that. But I was always looking up. I was always aware that there's something more. But again, so this is where I'm at today here with you guys. So, but yeah,
Right.
Thank you.
We'll get back to that kind of animal, all that stuff. But I'll continue, Sean, unless someone else. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, please. People can jump in as we go, and there's plenty of time to cover all these different aspects.
Right. Yeah, we have all the time you want. Okay.
And so, so as that was happening, I started looking around like, okay, who are people that I can find who have had experiences of both of these different kinds of non-human intelligences, right? And there's actually a lot more out there than you realize. You just don't realize it at first. So I came across the book, Meet the Hybrids. And in that book, there were a number of people who talked about having both kinds of experiences, and as well as experiences with celestial intelligences.
Barbara Lamb has been a guest on this show, so
Barbara is an amazing pioneer. She, I have a lot of respect for her. So so that book was really instrumental. So I reached out to two of the people who are authors in that book and had sessions with them to try and kind of start to make sense of this. And I think a lot of us, when we're in this process, we, on some level, we ask ourselves, am I crazy? So I was kind of like asking them, am I crazy? They're like, nope, welcome to the club, so that, but I have a really strong academic component, and I have a really strong kind of, Buddhist, verification of spiritual experience component. So it's been a process kind of coming to terms with what I would call self-gnosis. Right? Like, where you're able to affirm and confirm your experience without the need for some kind of external reference point or validation. That doesn't mean I'm not engaged in those processes. I am. But, we live in such a heavy scientific materialist, show me the proof, you don't see it till you believe it, and, don't believe it till you see it. And even if you see it, don't believe it, so, there's a process of kind of deconditioning. There's a process of soul searching that comes with these territories. I don't think of myself as an experiencer as much as maybe a micro experiencer. I've had a lot of small micro experiences that kind of.
What's a micro experience? What does that does that mean?
Well, meaning that, I haven't had a lot of the classic kinds of experiences that, so-called UFO or ET experiencers have. But I've had enough kind of other types of experiences like here and there, that I have an experiential basis from which I can connect to and understand a lot of, kind of more intense kinds of experiences that people have had in these encounters. And so I started coming out of the, ET closet, and talking about this with some of my colleagues. And I was really surprised, so these are my integral friends. We talk about all kinds of mystical experiences, ayahuasca trips, psychedelic trips, a lot of different kinds of non-ordinary and extraordinary experiences. No one had ever talked about, any kind of galactic experience. But as I started coming out and talking about my experiences, a lot of my close friends actually told me experiences that they had had that blew me away. And I was just like, you're shitting me. Like, what? Like, seriously? When did this happen? Why didn't you ever tell me? And I realized that this taboo is so big. It's so intense. It's like, so even among like spiritual brothers and sisters, like who are talking about all kinds of aspects of consciousness, and like, we just don't go there. So this emboldened me to say, okay, more people are having these kinds of experiences that I'm having, and not just the galactic ones, but also with the Fae and the fairy beings and the elementals. And so, I reached out to Stuart Davis because he heard from other integral friends like that I was having these experiences, and he had a really amazing mantis being encounter. So we were kind of comparing notes and connecting. And I told him, I said, I want to put together a year-long program in what I'm calling exo studies. And I want to I want to explore this topic, from a psychological perspective, a sociological perspective, a scientific perspective. Like, I want to bring all of the insight that we have in the academy and all these different domains. I want to bring that to bear on the phenomenon. I want to draw on UFO and space studies. I want to draw on the esoteric and paranormal literatures and experiences. This phenomenon is so weird and mysterious and confusing. How can we expect to understand it without bringing everything to bear on it? So at this point, I realized that kind of my effort with integral ecology and the 200 schools of ecology and was just kind of the warm up, right? That was just, it's like this is a much bigger kind of, elephant to try and, to eat. And so,
I want to jump in really quick, just so people know. Were the books, the reference, was it 650 books for our reference sheet? You're integrating 650 authors and topics and just distilling that down. I just had to jump in. It's a photographic memory for all this.
I also want to ask you, when you read Wilbur, but no one ever reads Wilbur's sources, which is Gebser. Did you read Jean Gebser?
I've read Gebser and Aurobindo and Teilhard de Chardin. I mean, my expertise is in integral thinking, with all those sources and others, including other contemporaries like Roy Bhaskar and Edgar Morin. And so that's really been,
and Julian Jaynes, right? The breakdown of the bicameral mind. And
exactly.
Right. Okay, continue. Yeah. This is I love your enthusiasm and excitement. Thank you. Go ahead.
So I put together kind of a 3-month course that then, when that was done, people wanted more. So I added some more weeks. It kind of became a 6-month course. And then I realized that there still was more to tackle. So I put together a lineup of 42 topics, right? Organized by kind of exploring multidimensional awareness, right? So, about 15 topics there. Then, culture and social dynamics, 15 topics there. And then kind of more nuts and bolts and science, 15 topics there. So that took up the year. And then, within each of those, I have a list of the books kind of to keep in mind for each of those topics. So on my website, exostudies.org, there's a bibliography organized by those 42 topics, with 650 books distributed across those, right? And all of those books are in my library, right? And I am engaged with it, I've read a majority of those. And so for me, it's kind of this, so I came into the course kind of wanting to wrap my mind around the phenomenon. But what I found and what really touched me was people really wanted to talk about their experiences. And so very soon in the course, all of a sudden I realized okay, this isn't just a chance for me to kind of figure it out from this big meta map, with all of my books and all of my quadrants and everything. Like there is a deep need for experiencers to talk about their experience, and not just their ET galactic experiences, because a lot of people are having encounters with angelic beings and celestial beings, or with nature beings and and so forth, or ghosts, or their own parallel selves and other timeline. It's just it quickly expands out into all kinds of possibilities. So one of the core
I just want to say, isn't it incredible how vast the human experience really is, and how limited Western psychology wants to make us and put us in these little boxes? Elizabeth, you have anything to say about that? And then we'll come back.
Yeah, please, Elizabeth.
Wait. Yes, Elizabeth. Unmute. Yeah.
Yeah, Sean, I didn't know we had so much in common. I've called myself a cosmic snoop. Right. Curiosity from the get-go, and often embarrassing my children who say, why do you have to know how all these things work? And I wanted to ask you 2 things. Are you familiar with J. Allen Boone's work, Kinship with All Life, and all his 4 books? He's one of my favorites. And Brilliant Green by
don't know him.
Stefano Mancuso, who shows us that that trees have at least a dozen senses more than ours, including ours plus about 12 more.
Wow. Right,
behind me, by the way, is the oldest tree fossil in the
Oh, wow.
world, which
Wow.
happened to have been dug up a mile from the hospital in which I was born, Cairo, New York.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
and so this is a really ancient tree, but I've had a lot of mystical experiences and wonderful, helpful things in my life from trees. So
Wow.
Trees
Okay.
are incredible.
All right, back to
Yeah.
you, Sean. So how are you putting us all together with all the, I mean, does it come together or is it still all these loose
Yeah.
ends?
You
Yeah.
didn't
Well, just-
mention the Sasquatch, Sean. You left
Right.
out the Squatch. It's one of
Oh,
your favorites.
Yeah, I love Bigfoot, and it's just I find the Bigfoot phenomenon to be such a fascinating and important part of all of this. And there's a lot of UFO ET encounters that include Sasquatch, so that there's a whole connection there that's fascinating. And and so one of the core mantras that I repeat to the participants in the program a lot is taking things serious but holding them lightly. Right. So like, how do we deal with all of these divergent viewpoints, these contradictory statements? It's like there's clearly a lot going on and a lot of people have a piece of the puzzle, but like, how do we fit it? Like, it's just, it's maddening. So my core orientation is if there's enough like data points, and data points don't just mean objective data points. It's like, subjective first person data points, second person intersubjective data points, third person objective data points. Like, I have a very broad notion of what's real and how do we verify it, and how do we, explore the nature of reality in a multi-dimensional sense. But like, if there are enough kind of corroborating, elements to something, then we need to take it seriously, like super seriously, even if it seems totally crazy, like take it seriously, but hold it lightly, because we're still gathering a lot of understanding. We're still comparing notes. There's a taboo on these topics that's been in place for 70 some years, that we're just learning how to talk about it. We're just learning how to compare notes. We're just learning how to think about it. We're just learning how to be in dialogue with these intelligences and at a new level and in a new way. So take it seriously, hold it lightly. And so this gives me, and I think a lot of my students, permission to go into territories that they're wanting to go into, but don't know necessarily how to approach it, right? Because sometimes it's overwhelming. And so, exo studies is really about creating a big tent, right? Where we can have a new kind of conversation, where we can bring very powerful intellectual, approach to it, draw on our sciences, the psychologies, the sociology, bring all of that to bear, but also like, stay grounded in the experience that people are having. And so, I wrote an article last year called Our Wild Cosmos. And it's, basically presents what I call an exo-studies exploration of the ontological status, a big philosophy word, of non-human intelligences. In other words, like, I'm really interested in like, what's the reality of these beings? Because I want to claim, and I feel many would agree, that like they're real. They're super real. Like, these are real beings, right? They're autonomous beings in many cases.
But isn't the problem is that we don't have a context within the social structure, social, academic, intellectual structures to place them? This is what John Mack would call ontological shock that we go into, because our reality is really based around the words we put on things. And if we can't name it, calling something an ET is just very superficial, because it doesn't mean it. Or like I say, identifying something as unidentified doesn't mean, it's doublespeak. So, so I think where you're going, I'm interested in where you're going, because you can't recognize something you haven't cognized, is my favorite way of saying that.
No, that's a big part of my orientation. So I'm going to share screen and just kind of walk everyone through a few points in the paper.
I am really enjoying your perspective, because it's kind of like verbalizing a lot of things I've been thinking about. So thank you, Sean.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. So here it is, the cover page, and give an overview. This quote was a big moment for me. It's long, but I think it's worth reading because it really encapsulates the exo studies orientation. So this comes from, the book, The Hunt for Skinwalker by Colum and George, and I'm just noticing that there's a mistake there that the title got left out. But anyways, so when I read this was the birth of exostudies. I read this quote in the book, and as soon as I read this, all of a sudden it like activated a soul contract that I have with pursuing this, this domain. So it says, in the future, an adventurous sociologist might consider writing a paper that examines the caste system in anomalies research. The nuts and bolts UFO research people regard the psychosocial UFO researchers with disdain. The UFO researchers in general regard the cryptozoologists with contempt. Cryptozoologists who embrace the possibility of a paranormal connection to Bigfoot sightings are generally viewed with derision because of the prevailing view that Sasquatch is an undisclosed primate species, not an interdimensional playmate of alien beings. Likewise, the paranormal researchers view the UFO researchers with disdain, while the ghost hunters keep their distance from everybody else. And all of this hostility and contempt is a vain and so far unsuccessful attempt to earn a small measure of respect and acceptance and maybe funding from the mainstream science, a lofty but unlikely goal, right? And then the next quote's from John Mack. Like, to me, this was the same situation with integral ecology that I had cut my integral teeth on as a graduate student, right? 200 different schools of thought, no one talking to each other, and very little opportunity to really apply all those insights to our planetary moment. So I outline the notion
anyway, I just want to say they really are the same thing, about the same thing. They're different aspects of something that we have yet to grasp within our very limited experience. But go ahead. Go ahead. Right.
So I then introduced the notion of metadisciplinarity, which is basically, it's like interdisciplinary, but on steroids, right? Because it's basically, I'm bringing together 150 domains and fields and topics, and there's an appendix that lists them all, right? So I'm drawing on mainstream academic, philosophical literature, UFO and space studies literature, esoteric and paranormal literature, as I mentioned a few moments ago, right? And then, I give all these examples of how academic thinking and the different disciplines could actually contribute to UFO and ET studies. And I won't go through this here, but, there's a lot of different examples that I map out of what this could look like. And then I point out that exostudies is really focused on multidimensional awareness, the development of a galactic-centric humanity, right? So with integral ecology, I talked about planet-centric consciousness, and Ken talks about cosmocentric, but he means something, more like non-duality with that. And so I've really tried to introduce and talk about galactic-centric, as kind of the next level, like that, he's left out and that you were mentioning as well. And then the development.
Well, I have to say, what orientated us towards the galactic centric was the 2012 Mayan countdown, where we went from a solar to a galactic awareness. That was my observation about what that whole 2012 thing was about. It was about going galactic. So, yeah.
So then I get into non-human intelligences, right? And the fact that humans have always encountered them, and that we need to develop what I call a new taxonomy of NHIs, right? Where do they come from? What do they look like? What do they want? Why are they here? Right. And so I developed kind of a way of talking about them, building on some work of other people. And, but I think what's more interesting is, and I basically identify, like, there's the fairy domain, the galactic domain, and the celestial domain, right? And there's a lot of overlap between those. I mean, that's part of what's interesting, is that all the beings you find in one of those categories, you tend to also find in the other categories, right? And there are a lot of experiencers who have experiences that cut across these categories. And so I point to a number of examples of other authors who basically identify these same three domains of different types of non-human intelligences. And, they use slightly different words for them, but they're pointing to the same kind of, loose division. And then have
you talked to Danny Sheehan about all this and the his new paradigm?
Yeah, I love Danny's work, and I'm kind of 1 or 2 degrees of separation from him, and looking forward to connecting at some point.
I'll connect you sometime. Okay.
So I did this deep dive on a number of authors to see, like, what kinds of non-human intelligences do they talk about, and which ones show up the most in the literature and the experiencer literature. And so I came up with this chart that has, basically 33 different kinds of non-human intelligences. And, not surprisingly, you have, kind of the classic five, ETs at the top, human looking ETs, reptilians, short grays, insectoids, and then tall grays or tall whites, right? And those showed up almost across all the different sources. And then I go through and point out all these other kinds of beings that different, authors and experiencers have talked about, to basically show like we live in a wild cosmos, right? The cosmos is filled with intelligences that show up in a wide range of bodies and forms. And so we're living in this multidimensional multiverse.
This is a huge amount of work. It's incredible. But what was saying, Nadi?
Yeah, Sean, I'm surprised that you have canines and not felines. I mean, Syrians and felines are such a prevalent presence. That surprises me.
Felines are number 13.
Oh, of course. I just missed it. You were going fast. Okay, great. Now I'm okay.
They're more popular than canines.
Yeah, way more. Okay, gotcha.
Twice as popular. All those lions.
I'm very impressed with this overview you're giving anyone approaching exo studies. This is amazing. Beautiful.
Thanks,
I told you so.
So
I have my own theories about Bigfoot. Actually, I think they're Neanderthals that became interdimensional. That's just came to me one day, but who knows?
Cool. Yeah.
Okay.
So then there's hundreds of variants within this. There's a lot of ways to think about this, but I just got so tired of everyone talking about there just being a few ETs, and it's just like, it's like the grays and the reptilians and the mantis beings. It's kind of like, well, yeah, but like there's a whole lot more going on out there, or in here, and so I really wanted to anchor it in the academic literature and the experiencer literature, right? To really see like how can those two types of sources support us thinking in new ways and getting a bigger view of part of what's going on. So then, skipping over this, which is I present 10 most common hypotheses as to like, who are these beings, right? And actually I would add, there's like 3 or 4 new ones I would add to it, but that's for an updated version. But just real quick, there's the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which is in many ways still the most popular. Then there's the extra dimensional hypothesis, which basically means they're ET, but they're not necessarily flesh and blood in a biological sense as we might think of it. And then within this, there are additional ones like ultra-terrestrial or crypto-terrestrial or inter-terrestrial, right? So there's variations on themes here. There's the time-traveling hypothesis, the dark military hypothesis, the psychosocial hypothesis, which basically says it's kind of a Jungian archetypal collective manifestation. There's the Earth lights hypothesis, that the tectonic plates are creating this extra energy and you get the Earth lights and balls. There's the intrapsychic hypothesis, which is basically a dismissive, we're making it all up in our minds. There's the co-creative.
Did you get some of this from the Richard Dolan studies, or did you develop it on your own?
I developed it on my own by reading all the books that I've read and just saying like, all right, what are the major theories? Like everyone's, often people will identify 2 or 3 of these, but I started comparing their lists and they often would include an additional one that the other, person didn't.
Right.
So I just started kind of collecting them to say, okay, what are all the main theories that seem to be, talked about? Great. Then there's the AI hypothesis, the breakaway civilization hypothesis. And then basically my point is, it seems all of these explain part of the phenomenon, right? Like I don't see any of them as false. And I don't see any one of them as the master explanation, right? Like they all seem to be pointing us to different layers of what's going on. And yet us human beings, we have this strong tendency to not think like that. We want one of them to be right and the others to be wrong. And and then we get in our camps and we fight, and it's just, it's kind of crazy. And so then I developed this new integrative hypothesis, which I call the mutual enactment hypothesis. Which is a fancy phrase for this chart, right? So here's the exo phenomenon in the middle, right? This is, all the various ways the phenomenon shows up. And there are human beings that are participating with it. There are non-human intelligences participating with it. There are different archetypes participating in it. There are thought forms like tupas or egregores, like that have been created
in through some process, different ways to do that or to understand that. And then there's the earth lights, the kind of the geomagnetic aspects. So all of these major kind of 5 kind of domains are all interacting with the exophenomenon. And then I map the major hypotheses, the 10 different hypotheses, onto this, showing that they tend to emphasize 1 or 2 of these lines, right? Mm-hmm. So they're just focusing on one aspect of the larger phenomenon. So here I'm trying to zoom out and say, how is it all of these could be right? How is it all of these could be helping us understand some part of what's going on? And, and not that I think that my particular rendition is, the end all be all, like I think we'll keep updating it, but it's trying to get us to a point of thinking differently about the phenomenon and understanding the multidimensional nature of the phenomenon. That is not one single thing. Like there's a lot of different things going on here. So then I talk about Wilber's 4 quadrants and how different hypotheses tend to connect with one of them more than others. So I do different analyses and I start building the case for how do we talk about the ways in which this phenomenon is real, right? What does it mean to be real? And so I go into a lot of different things like what's an object? And, so this gets really philosophical and academic.
I see you like Jeffrey Kripal. I think he's an important thinker in this field. He's
been a huge inspiration and an emerging colleague. And here's an interesting point, right? So if you think about legal evidence and you think about scientific evidence, those are often understood as different domains of evidence. When you think about UFO and ET evidence, we have tons of legal evidence, right? Like almost all 19 of these, you find evidence for the phenomenon. And so in the court of law, you could get a conviction, right? You could get, a clear statement that this phenomena is real and exists. When you get over to the scientific evidence, it's harder, it's more complex because the way traditional science is set up is inadequate for the study of the phenomenon because the phenomena doesn't lend itself to laboratory analysis, right? And, a good example of this is the Skinwalker Ranch. Bob Bigelow throwing millions of dollars and scientists and PhDs at it. They documented a wide range of phenomenon, but it never repeated itself. So in effect, they were never able to study it scientifically, right? And so this is where I bring in my view that we need to upgrade and up-level what we mean and how we talk about science and scientific evidence. And it's kind of like the iPhone, right? If the iPhone was brilliant because it used a bunch of existing technology and it brought it together in a new novel way, right? So there was nothing about the iPhone that was innovative other than the integration of all of this existing tech into a very slick, handheld device. Mm-hmm. I feel there's a similar analogy with where we need to go in terms of an integrative metascience. All the components are there. There are amazing thinkers and philosophers and scientists who have articulated or mapped out different components of a post-material science or an integrative science and so forth. And what's kind of left to be done, and though some are working on this, is kind of bringing it together in a way that's more accessible and helping to contrast it with our more kind of reductionistic mainstream approach to science. And so that's one of my big.
Don't you think the problem with science is the scientific method can only test for what it knows? There's no test for what it doesn't know. We can't, I mean, it's more the imaginative, the creative that is the ones that start to reach out into the unknown and start to bring it into, categorize it. But that's outside the realm of science. But I think that's the limits of science is the known, not the unknown. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. And I think there's actually a lot around science that allows us to go beyond that. And that's kind of my point, is that there's been really good philosophy of science. There's been really good approaches to what does science look like when it goes beyond the known and into the unknown, and how can it operate in a sophisticated way? We have a very kind of first grade view of science. It's kind of like it has to be on the table and we have to be able to poke it. There are a lot of inductive forms of science. There are a lot of other kinds of sciences. There's also, when you get into triangulation and you you can point to a lot of different things that make something more likely the case, right? And I think we even see this with the ET, topic, where people will often point to Occam's razor, right? But what's like the simplest explanation is the one you go with. It's getting to the point where in many cases, the simplest explanation is the ET hypothesis, right? Like that's a more simple explanation than all these mental gymnastics that some of our scientists are doing.
Like if you look at the Senate Intelligence Report, the June 25th, they avoid that simple explanation.
Right.
They space clutter.
Exactly.
I mean,
right.
But that's you're exactly right. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm something on that one though. For me, it's exactly the same. Like everything is starting to make not starting to, but just making more and more sense the faster I default to oh yeah, that's involving extraterrestrial intelligence. It's just, hybrid programs, it all makes so much more sense when you just like that one catch-all.
So I think that's
you want to keep going or you
Yeah, no, let's open it up. I think, I've kind of sucked up a lot of oxygen. I think
this is not oxygen. This is nourishment, for me.
Oh, good. I'm giving oxygen.
No, you're giving me oxygen. Yes, that's right. No, but just like what, so you have all these elements and you've done the best analysis of the exo phenomena I've ever seen. And I've seen, 30 years worth of research. So what do you make? I mean, what conclusion, can we wrap it all up together, or we're not sophisticated enough, or we just don't have enough pieces? I mean, what's your conclusion here?
Yeah. One of the core concepts I develop in exo studies is doubleness. And that is the phenomenon consistently demonstrates doubleness, that it expresses two contradictory qualities, often simultaneously or concurrently or sometimes sequentially, right? So it often feels like it's happening inside us and it's happening outside us. Like it's subjective and it's objective. It's physical and it's consciousness. It's, and so there's all these ways in which it's very paradoxical. So I do have emerging conclusions, right? But at the same time, I really stay connected to the mystery of it because I feel like we're just beginning to be in dialogue in a more sophisticated, mutual way with the phenomenon and these intelligences. So I don't think any quick, conclusion is warranted. I primarily focus on how can we create a safe place for smart people to talk about weird things, right? So that we can really, explore this together and get away from the taboo, get away from the social stigma, and just see where the conversation goes. So I'm mostly interested in what are new distinctions that I can provide or present from an academic or philosophical or sociological perspective that allow us to have new conversations, that we can talk about the phenomena in new ways. Because I feel like we're it's like you said, you have to cognize it first. It's like the distinction enables a way of being in relationship to it, right? That wasn't possible before. Right. And it's like, we're suffering from kind of a lack of useful frameworks and distinctions so that we keep thinking about the phenomena in some simplistic, biological entity in a metal craft. Now, that seems to be part of the phenomenon, right? But I would be very hesitant to say that's the majority of it, right? Or even the most interesting part of it, right? So how do we expand our categories of thinking, not from a mental place of just trying to put everything in boxes, but rather from a heartfelt place of intimacy, that these distinctions enable a new kind of contact, right? And so, as we differentiate our own consciousness and integrate it, it allows new kinds of communion, right? To use Whitley Strieber's notion, I think it's a powerful notion, both in terms of how he's developed it, but if we just expand and build on that notion of communion, right? So to me, this is the integration of the mind with the heart and the body, right? So how can we bring the best that our mind has, as academics, as philosophers, as scientists, to explore all of this? How do we stay connected to experience and experiencers in a heartfelt sense, right? I mean, we're having a hard enough time getting along as human beings who have different skin colors or sexual orientations. how are we going to introduce 5 to 30 different types of non-human intelligences or alternate human intelligences, right? Because it also appears a lot of these intelligences are human in every sense of the way, but in a way radically different than how we might understand ourselves, you know? So how do we redefine humanity in a way that is you know, informed by all of this?
You're right. It's about redefining who we are as human beings, because we're not as limited as we have been made out to believe.
Yeah.
And that's why I like talking to people like Kat, who's already tapped into these other perceptions, and it's a part of your everyday reality, right, Kat? I mean, would you say? I mean, so
Absolutely.
how do you integrate this in your life? And then maybe we'll hear from, how is it integrated for you? What, were you going to say something, Sean?
No, go ahead, Kat.
Well, it's really an interesting the way you've put the question out there, but really it's kind of like I got out of the box, you know. I mean, it just the moment I got out of the box, and it's like, oh, I see so much more. I'm not going back in that box. And now I know that there's so much more. And so then when you're knowing that there's so much more, you want to continue learning about so much more. And again, but the more that you're learning, the more it shows up, because the more you put your conscious and awareness to something, you're also creating more and more and more and more of it. Correct? Right. So it's not never ending, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is kind of the,
Go ahead. You'll go. Yes. No. So go ahead. Finish. No. This is what we're going to say.
So the whole idea of mutual enactment hypothesis is that we bring something to the party and they bring something to the party, right? There's a mutual co-creation, you know, in an important sense, both psychologically, spiritually, but also ontologically, like that. There's, you know, and this is why, you know, 5 people sitting on a tailgate in a field in Kansas, you know, 3 will have an experience of a UFO coming over for a couple of minutes. You know, 2 of them will not have seen it at all, you know, for some strange reason. And the 3 that saw it, one will have seen a cigar-shaped craft, and the other 2 would have seen a more classic, you know, kind of flying saucer craft, right? In our current way of scientific thinking, we would use that to discount the experience. To me, that's actually evidence of the phenomenon. That's the mutual enactment of the dynamic interaction between consciousness, the phenomenon, and oneself, right? Yeah. So that it makes complete sense to me that the consciousness of 2 people would have been such that they don't see it. The consciousness interaction and mutual enactment of 2 of them would have seen a cigar-shaped craft, and then the other one would have seen a flying saucer in the classical sense. Right. So like, how do we expand our understanding of consciousness and reality such that that scenario is actually evidence and can be understood as evidence?
Elizabeth, you've been studying this for a long time. I'm sure Elizabeth has the solution here.
Good. Let's hear it, Elizabeth. I've been waiting.
No, I think Sean is talking about the solution, and that's co-creation. And you know, I'm thinking of my keyboard metaphor for the universe, Sean, is just matter, energy, spirit, and showing that the different sciences of the world have looked at it from the different ends, so that Western science tries to derive the universe from the matter end of the keyboard of vibrations that everything is made of. And the Vedic scientists and Taoists and many indigenous cultures started the consciousness and mind, spirit, and just slow things down to create matter. So it's easier for them to derive the whole keyboard than it has been for Western science, with this kind of unique materialist obsession. But it's just, it's very interesting that you've been able to, that you have the kind of mind that can, you know, hold all this information and put it together this way so that people can see this, the unity in the diversity. And to see that my question that was on my mind right as you called on me was, humans have always been storytelling creatures. And so we make up our stories about our reality, and we get stories from who do we consider authorities, and why is it important to know that, and all those things. And I'm wondering about I distinguish between communication and communion. You know, communion is what everything in nature does. and which we are perfectly capable of, which our own cells do with each other and their bacteria. But we developed languages in which you tell stories. And I wonder how many ETs, because I think most of them are communicating by communion,
Right.
the direct transmission. I mean, hey, if you can even drive a spaceship with your mind,
Right.
who needs languages? And if you can talk to anyone on any planet, who needs languages? So what's the difference between cultures that have this direct access to each other within great mind, little minds within great mind, and we storytellers who co-create our reality through stories?
Yeah. Wow. I love that question and just that inquiry. I think that's one of the fascinating things about the experience or literature is it's very consistent that 95% of the interactions are telepathic in terms of communication, right? And so
That's
telepathy,
yeah.
and so I think it does raise a lot of issues as we think about being a language-based culture. Like what does it mean to be kind of post-language or non-language based, and how does that, because language structures our consciousness in a very profound way. And so as we get into like what might be called exopsychology or exoanthropology or exosociology, right, like the study of alien cultures and ET minds and and ET religions, right, I think that's kind of the very cool, exciting frontier of of where we're headed. And I think we're going to be there in the next 100 years where those are like real disciplines where we're kind of comparing and exploring those kinds of questions, right, where we're actually in dialogue and communion and in communication with a variety of additional types of advanced intelligences, and kind of really, like to Alan's point, expanding our sense of what it means to be human. So yeah, I don't know, it's going to be fascinating, but I think we have a lot to learn. And this is why the study of animal consciousness I think is so fascinating and a really good source for exo studies, right? And that was kind of my home base in college, was studying that. And so like whether it's dolphins or the whales, or whether the chimps, or border collies, like rats now demonstrate self-awareness. I mean, like the advances in animal consciousness studies over the last 10 years has been incredible, right? And really showing that there are so many sophisticated forms of non-linguistic consciousness and intelligent forms of consciousness that are not based in language, right? And so I think we have a lot to learn from the animals and plants and trees on this planet as an entry point to understanding exopsychology of ETs.
Wow, this is so amazing. I want to ask, like, Nadia and Cord, who studied with you for what, 42 weeks, was it?
Or year and a half. Of course,
right.
Been with me from the beginning.
Right. So what were the conclusions, like Nadia, to start? What did you looked at all this that Sean brilliantly put together to kind of make our awareness expanded in all these sorts of ways. But what do you take away? I mean, how will you expand? What happened? I'm just curious for you and Court. Like what?
Yeah, it's tricky to encapsulate. I mean, let's just pause for that 50-minute overview of your entire life studies, Sean. It's just incredible, like what you just covered. And I think that's a core part of what my experience was there was so much intelligence. I mean, you ought to check out the crew that we had. I mean, amazing people, and so much, book knowledge and empirical evidence orientation. And I had a twofold experience. That's not the right way to say it, but
A double.
The two main take homes, right, was that because of all that intelligence, I don't have book intelligence. I can't quote. I can't, I don't have that brain. I can simply appreciate them. I have such a much more like experiential, intuitive, empathic, very typical divine feminine presentation. And so two things happened. One is that Lots of things happened. One was that I did a thing of comparing myself and coming up short, and then I worked through that process, right? Because in that group setting, I could see so many that were similar and so many that had other styles, and that was ultimately really empowering. And the fact it was so normalizing, and I really walked out feeling so empowered to talk about this stuff, which I know is one of the huge goals of Sean's is. I was just like, hey, I've got 60 people who are talking about this every week. I can talk about this. So it was this emboldening aspect. And then I think there was also one piece that I think is worthy. The empirical was frustrating for me. Like it goes alongside, right? I did really well in the sociological weeks. I did really well in the psychological weeks and all of the telepathy and all of the different interactive weeks. Fascinating. And then we closed out with all the technical sciencey stuff. I love science, but everybody was so focused on the nuts and bolts. I got irritated. I just got so irritated with humanity. And because I'm gone, man. I'm like already in the hybrid. Like I'm like
In there, done that.
Yeah, like we're so primitive, and I got like more and more convinced of and frustrated with that. So it was this whole gamut, and I think Sean, that like there was a real interpersonal spiritual evolutionary aspect to the year, and I know you try to preface the outline of the year with that. It gets mentioned, but it's an odyssey. There's no way to really prepare anyone for the personal exploration, the personal growth that comes through all that study. It was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. That was my overview.
And I'll just add before Court shares is, I think also we're living in a really exciting time around all of this. Like so much has happened since the 2017 article in the New York Times, and even though, all of that still remains largely on the nuts and bolts side, like it still is shifting things. And like, there's so many good podcasts and good documentaries and good, but like, there's like this renaissance of information. And so to be in a year-long course, having a front row seat to, the 50 things that have happened in kind of UAP, UFO, ET studies, right? It's just been incredible to kind of have a group of people to kind of go, oh my God, did you see what happened last week? Or, it's just like to kind of process, the discovery / disclosure as it's happening has been really delightful.
Yeah, that's why I do this, because it's like, let's bring it in. Or Clubhouse. I'm on Clubhouse all the time talking about this stuff. So yeah. So Court, what was your takeaway from this incredible download of intellectual?
Alan, I'm still. I would say that first of all, I followed Sean I met Sean through Ken Wilber, and I have a long history of involvement with various spiritual traditions and disciplines, and with Ken's framework. But basically, I am not an experiencer yet, never have been to my knowledge. And I emphasize the yet, okay?
I have to say, just having this conversation makes you an experiencer of sorts.
Well, okay, that's a different level, Alan. But I will tell you that my basic response over the year with Sean's 60 other folks is first of all, I came in mostly with curiosity. And I have been in about halfway through, I fell into ontological shock.
And what did that do to you?
Okay, and what it felt, one of the metaphors that I realized at one point in one of our sessions halfway through, it felt like somebody had dragged me back through the birth canal. I had to start all over. Okay, and I've started all over. And I have been exposed to enough now that I have my own prejudices about what is the multidimensional reality out there. I am utterly convinced that there is a multidimensional reality out there in a way that can, as you have said, Alan, and others have said, Ken Wilber has not recognized yet. Yeah. And I think one of the interesting future boundary breakers is going to be in at least one of the boundaries I'm struggling with is bringing this expanded sense of objective reality together with what we need as an expanded first-person spirituality.
Right. You know, it's so important what you said, because I think you're like the canary in the coal mine, if you don't mind me saying.
I'm happy to play canary.
No, but I want to ask Sean this question, maybe everyone else, Elizabeth, like, so what Court went through, it's like what the population of the planet will go through if we have Senate intelligence committees, if they roll out the ships and there's a mass this is exactly what we need. That's why the subtitle of the book is Preparations for the New Realities of Extraterrestrials. So Sean, what is your answer to the rude awakening that the planet and the people, the population, the uninformed, those with their, heads out in the television or mainstream, what are we going to do for them in a way?
Yeah, no, this is a big topic, and we, talked about it at several points throughout the year. There is what might be thought of as like an education gap, right? And, and so it's hard for me because I've been steeped in this, for many years now, and not just steeped in it, but like really diving in. So it's like, it's like, how do you bring someone up to speed, right? There's so much that has to be explained and explored and discussed. And it's just like, it really, in a sense, it would take someone, unless they were in like this accelerated 1-year program like mine, where it's just like, we're just kind of, diving in a crazy, insane way, for, week after week for a year. But a lot of people don't have that. I think it's a 5 to 10 year process probably, but we probably don't have that time, right? Before these realities become more and more self-evident, right? And so there's going to be this education gap, and then all kinds of spin is going to occur, right? As people try and put in, their view of what this is and isn't. And so I think it's going to be really difficult because we're already in a post-truth era, right? It's like we can't agree on climate change and COVID. How are we going to agree on the Galactic Federation? It's like we're really like, and so part of what I talk about in extra studies is the notion of social ontologies, of living, in a multiple ontological space where it's like there's kind of multiple realities, real realities kind of occurring concurrently in a contradictory side-by-side way that's very disorienting for a lot of people. And so I think the ontological shock at a collective level is going to be huge. And I think that's going to be the hardest part of disclosure/discovery, right? That it's going to take us, and I think Richard Dolan's correct in his AD After Disclosure book, where he basically, says that once, it happens, like once there's kind of a collective acknowledgement that we are in a galactic situation, that it's probably going to take the first year is going to be a major meltdown of most major systems, right? And it's going to take 1 to 2 years to kind of get our bearings, right? It's like, and he goes through, and not that his analysis is accurate across the board, but I think it's symbolically correct. Like, the stock market is going to go crazy. The military is going to go crazy. Our educational system has to be revised. Like our religions have to be updated. It's just kind of like nothing, our view of our own DNA, right? The whole, like everything is going to be on the chopping block. right? And like, where are the epistemological authorities? Is one of the phrases, epistemological authority. Like, who do we trust? Who do we turn to help guide us through this process? Like, who emerges in that can be people we trust and help us make sense of it, and
where does he get 1 to 2 years? Where does he get it's going to take us 1 to 2 years?
You think that it can take longer?
Yeah.
Sean. Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth. Oh, go.
No, go ahead, Elizabeth.
We're trying to deal with this extraordinary complexity. And I'd like to go back to 1995 when I was speaking at the When Cosmic Cultures Meet first disclosure conference ever with John Mack, et cetera.
Oh, wow, amazing.
And by the way, I'm friends with Miguel Mendonça, and he's just emailed me 2 days ago about can he interview me for a third book.
Oh, wonderful.
After he stopped doing the ET books, he did one on wisdom and one on home, and now he's going to do one on mystery. Anyway, I'd like to go back to that John Mack stuff because John Mack made such a powerful case for so many of the ETs being here to warn us about what we're doing to our planet and why we should not destroy our planet. And just before this meeting started, I was listening to the latest tape on the wonderful trauma a series that's going on through science and non-duality right now around Gabor Mate's work on trauma, and the indigenous people that he had on in a dialogue with Mate was just wonderful because they have the same understanding. Right. If we don't get it, that if we don't, as one of the women put it, see everything in nature as a gift to us humans. You have a very different attitude towards something that's a gift, like a hand nip cap rather than one you pick up in Walmart. That we've got to, if we could bring it down to that simple issue of people are now focused on climate change. That is one thing that's uniting the world, even if they don't unite on how they see it or whether they believe in it, they're talking about it. And it's getting very, very real for very many people. Yeah. And if we can talk about the ET phenomenon in relation to what they want of us on our planet and why they're standing by, waiting for us to start treating our Earth less traumatically,
Yeah,
that beautiful. I mean, the point of the trauma conference is that trauma is not just a personal thing. Trauma is a social thing. Yeah. And the very things that traumatize us about society are society, right? Because it's traumatically bad for all of us, and we sense that in our bodies, and so we all experience it. So can we how can we make this easier for people by bringing it down to that kind of a grounding issue?
Yeah. For me, I think part of it is I feel really called to support the experiencers, right? I feel like, we lifting the taboo, making it possible for more people who have experiences with these realities to talk about them, to share them, because they offer us so much. It's like, even if you don't believe them or don't know what to do with what they're saying, often you can feel the sincerity, you can feel the humanity, you can feel, different aspects of who they are, right? And I think it starts to open up the possibilities. I think, and this is why I'm so glad that Ralph Blumenthal's recent article on abductions was published online, and that, because the conversation for the last 2 years has just been the nuts and bolts, right? The experiencers have not been part of the larger mainstream conversation. And I'm waiting and trusting that we're going to get there, and we're starting to get there. Because as I see it, it's like kind of the road is UFOs are real. We're already there. We've accepted that. The U.S. government has acknowledged that. We have metamaterials. We're already there. The next one is we have recovered crashed off-world vehicles, which were basically there, but kind of trying to deal with what that really implies.
Well, Eric Davis admitted that to the New York Times last year, July 2020. So
absolutely,
okay.
Yeah. So
we have that.
Meaning that it's out there, but it was on page 17, right? And people are kind of ignoring it. It's like they just don't know what to do with it. So it's kind of like we're half there. then once we get into recovered craft, we get into recovered ETs, bodies and live beings. As soon as we get to there, then we're acknowledging there's multiple types that we're interacting with. And then abductions start to become a serious topic, right? And then we get into the hybridization, topic, and then we get into the fact that they're living among us, right?
Well,
So
but
there's
it's
kind
a
of
law.
like this-
But isn't it a big step from crash retrievals to abductions? That's like okay, we'll buy crash retrievals, but abduction. I mean, we can go back to Betty and Barney Hill, but that's the big integration nexus point. I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, going from bodies, live and dead to abductions is a big step. But I think once we acknowledge that there are ETs and EDs, right, that there are some biologically based ones, there's some energetically or conscious based ones. Once that becomes a more accepted consensual reality,
Right.
then the whole topic of, okay, some have different agendas, some have different, kind of things there, and then I think it helps make the conversation around abduction, or, encounters, negative encounters, much more possible, right? It's still a leap, but
I get it. Yeah. So, hey, Kat, you disappeared. Did you want to go ahead? You were going to jump in.
I just wanted to, because there's how many worlds that we're living in, how many earths that we're living in, right? So it's your reality that what you're putting out there and where you're putting your attention and focus. So for me, it's, it's either the old earth or the one that was in fear. Well, that's not the earth that I'm living in now. And the awareness that we're bringing to ETs and many more beings. And that's the earth that I'm living in, to bring the awareness. But when you're asking of like when it's going to happen, a year or two from now, or again, I think it's really about how you put your thoughts out there and creating it. Because the more that you put your awareness, the more that it comes to you also in this earth. So what type of earth do you want to live in? So I really do believe it's about the consciousness of the earth, because there's infinite earths probably, right? I mean, think about that. And so that's just how I view it. And so I believe that the more that we put our attention and awareness of what we want to create or bring awareness to, that's the earth that you're living in.
Yeah, I resonate with that, and I think, for many, disclosure and discovery's already happened, right? It's like they're not waiting for anything, it's like they're already
always been here. We just arrived here now. We've arrived on that earth to, that's kind of how I feel as well.
But, I'm just getting back to the ontological shock moment.
Right.
When you say, okay, there's crash, these UAPs, but they've been taking the population of the world since probably David Jacobs, and I think it goes back to the 1800s or before. That is huge to integrate. That is like you fall off your ontological rocker with. It's like, what? I mean, I believe it because I've had an experience, and I still say, really, did that really happen? I mean, it's like I'm like in both worlds. Like, well, it may be. I had a mark on my leg. I had missing time. And could that be possible under the shape of reality that I've been, brought up and conditioned and brainwashed to think is the world? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. What were you going to say? I mean, how do you get?
Going to jump in. Court, were you jumping in a second ago with that?
Oh yeah.
Alan, I wouldn't take it back to the 1800s. You have to take it back to the beginning of Homo sapiens.
Right. We're hybrid.
We are likely. I've got to the point where I have kind of accepted that it's most likely that we are all hybrids.
Yeah.
Our DNA from the beginning was probably a hybrid and part of a continuing experiment.
Right. That's Linda Moulton Howe's favorite, sort of one of her catchphrases, that the evolving primates were upgraded. by these races. Yeah.
But I think it's also, then the question becomes, how does one, well, as we've just been discussing, how does one communicate that kind of reality to a broader audience? And I do resonate with what Elizabeth said, because it is a matter of, at one level, it's a matter of species and planetary survival. And that is I think that's kind of a baseline to begin with. I think anyway, that's my take at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
I gotta tell you, I have to jump in. At the beginning of the course, right? Like there were so many of us that were, well, not me, that were like, I don't know if this is real. What's going on here? You know, and Court, your just genuine curiosity. If we had sat down at the beginning of the year and I had said, by the end of the year, you're going to be thinking that humanity is a hybrid population. Like the course was so wonderfully expansive ontologically, right? And I'm so grateful for that. Court, it's just been so fun. I love hearing you.
I just want to read this message for Elizabeth. She has another appointment. Much love to all. Special appreciation to Sean. If you're still there, Elizabeth, you could, I guess she left, but she could say goodbye. But she is a great mind, and what a resource to have here every week, and an explorer. She's putting together all the pieces, and
but I have a question. I'm going to build on that on a question because okay, awesome, jumping in. So Elizabeth's been doing this for so long, right? To pioneer, she's busted through the hard walls of academia, and she's really helped to create like such a more open consciousness around ecology and just everything that matters, I would say. And I'm curious, Sean, you've been at a forefront. You are putting together a PhD program for, it's not necessarily ufology, but the languaging, you got away with something really important. And I'm wondering, as you've talked a little bit about, as you branched out and branched off of the integral trajectory, like what has it been like for you and your academic community? How is it when you talk about mantids? What do they do with that?
Yeah, I'm still feeling my way through that process. And but yeah, it's very exciting because similar to how, as I started talking about my mantid experience and other similar experiences with my integral friends and colleagues, and then as I mentioned, I started discovering a lot of them had their own encounters with non-human intelligences that would be probably most appropriately characterized as galactic or extra-dimensional ET. That a similar thing is happening in the academy, right? And Jacques Vallée has this great phrase, the invisible college, which basically refers to kind of all the academics and scientists who are super into this topic, but are not publicly discussing it. So they do it behind closed doors. And so it's the invisible college. So I'm very interested in playing a role with making the invisible college visible, right? And really helping to pioneer an academic safe space for, and there's hundreds and thousands of academics, in all these different disciplines who are very engaged and interested in these topics. And I just think that we're seeing a lot of people calling for a scientific investigation into UAP. And I think that's a good step forward. I also think, it's somewhat could reify the materialism that I think is part of the problem, right? So for me, expanding it from just a scientific focus, which will remain largely nuts and bolts, I really want to help pioneer an academic focus, which brings in the psychological, the sociological, the cultural, the mythic, the religious, and the scientific, right? So the scientific is part of it, but we have a larger kind of intellectual container. And so I'm launching with a colleague, Ed Sareth, an academic consortium for the, study of UAP and, exo studies, right? And as one step in that process. And then, as you mentioned, Nadi, there's the PhD. And yeah, I think, in a sense, this is kind of a one of a kind, opportunity on the planet right now. You can't really go to an accredited institution and get a master's or PhD in integral noetic sciences with a concentration in anomalous studies and study exotheology or study the abduction phenomena or study, the relationship between near-death experiences, ghosts, and, UAP encounters, and also students in the program, there's an option where they can design their own concentration. So they could title that UFO studies, or they could title that exo studies, or they could title that, consciousness and, out of body experiences, folks, my hope is to create an academic opportunity for students who can't study these things in other places, but who really want to be part of the next wave of leadership, helping us to learn how to talk about it, learn how to investigate it, and really kind of, shift the fear earth to, a thriving earth. So yeah, it's exciting, and I really think that this program's going to get, big. I think, we're going to have 50, 100, 150 people in it over the next, 5-10 years, right? Because there's nowhere else you can go to do this.
It's really
Michael,
fantastic. Yeah, I just wanted to say, so how long have you had the courses that you've been teaching?
The Exo Studies year-long course just finished the year-long process. So that's the first time I've done the full year. I did a 6-month version prior to that. So all of that's kind of been going on for 2 years. I'm going to offer a new course next year for 6 months focused on cultivating our capacities to make contact by working with the subtle senses, and then I'll look at, at what point do I reactivate the year-long program, but it's quite a process and commitment, so we'll see when I do that again, but yeah, definitely more is coming.
where you, Michael, you want to jump in with a question? Because I have.
Well, I just think it's, amazing feat of intellectual work that you've done in terms of your categorization and, just the thoroughness of what you've done. I really admire that. And
thank you.
I was wondering what kind of resonance you're able to get now with Ken Wilber, or if you're able to discuss your work with him, or with, more largely within the integral community. I mean, you did say that people came forward and told you about their, their experiences that they hadn't shared before. And then I'd just be curious if it's not stepping out of bounds of yours, from having been an intelligent observer of the whole integral movement, of your sense of that and its limitations and its potential for impacting, planetary consciousness. And just one little thing that I'd mentioned to you is, when I worked for Buckminster Fuller,
oh wow,
you were talking about, the different organizations in the environmental world not talking to each other. The year that my wife and we ran the World Game program on strategies for feeding humanity, we were also dealing with all these different hunger organizations. I mean, this was like 1979, and there was literally much more hunger on the planet, of people starving. I mean, now it still comes up in war zones, but one of the things we were able to do was get these people to be more supportive of each other and respectful of the fact that they were all working for the same goal, even if they had radically different philosophies and approaches. And I would think that that's something that needs to be done with, ecology as well.
Yeah. And exo.
I mean, I just saw something that, a man who was going to give some important public talk at MIT on climate change was then just disinvited because of some, political issue on college campuses, where this guy had written something in Newsweek magazine saying that he was in favor of making admissions in college more diverse, but he wasn't in favor of changing grading so that you would grade people differently based on their, ethnic group or something. And for that position, which I had personally no idea was now politically, the political gospel is, certain groups should be graded more leniently. He was disinvited from giving an important lecture on climate change. And my assertion is that, in the integral, they're able to explain those kinds of things. They talk about the green meme and things. But if the progressives continue to operate in this kind of way, And then we have the other people who deny climate change, and then the other people who maybe believe in it and don't want to spend money. We're in big trouble.
Well, I think Sean can pull it all together.
Yeah. So Sean, pull it all together.
All
No,
right, thanks, Michael. Great series of questions and considerations. Yeah, Ken, he's not really going near any of this with a 10-foot pole. He's keeping his distance. And in fact, in a recent interview, Layman Pascal was asking him about this and, mentioned my name and the work I'm doing. And Ken very lovingly and with a big smile on his face basically said, let Sean write about it. He's really good at applying integral to lots of things. So, so he's happy for me to kind of, take the bullet for the team and then stick my neck out there. I don't think he's really ever going to come around, to these topics and the ways that we're engaged. And I think that's fine. Ken's gift has been enormous to the planet. And it's like, I just have so much love and appreciation for what he's done and how he's allowed me to develop my own kind of integral orientation and approach. I think integral theory, has a lot of capacity to hold all of this, right? So even though Ken's particular version of integral theory might not include this, I think, the theory, the intellectual architecture he's developed and how people like me are expanding it and populating it with, these kinds of topics and issues, I think integral theory has a lot to offer. The integral movement, has a lot of, challenges and issues, and I would be happy to get into any of that. I've, been a leader and a participant in that for 20 years. So I have a lot to say. What I see happening now is things like metamodernism, having kind of a rise in academic discourse. And so that's kind of like the new version of the integral approach is kind of metamodernism, and so it's interesting to see how new forms or variations or versions of integrative thinking are occurring, in a lot of different domains, right? And so I think Ken kind of helped activate a kind of integral consciousness on the planet. And so there's a lot happening that's not necessarily draws its lineage back to Ken, but I think is in alignment and in some ways is now possible because of some of the groundwork he and the people working with his approach have allowed. So I think it's been amazing to see that process.
Well, one of the great thing Ken says, he said a lot of things, and I think he got it from Gebser, is there's the pre-rationalists,
Right.
Who believe that, the stars are talking to them, and there's ghosts and the ancestral spirits. But of course, when you become a rationalist, you see all that as just nonsense and manufactured. But the post-rationalists are the ones that go back and say, you know what, maybe there really are ghosts. And I know there are because I slept in a haunted house and you can't, I know. And so, but to the rationalists, the post-rationalists look like pre-rationalists, like superstition.
Right. Yeah,
so
exactly.
You're dealing with academia for the most part that is based in linear, mechanistic, Western Newtonian science. And that's where they'll be and stay. So there doesn't seem room for ghosts and ETs and Yetis within an academic model as we know it to be. That's why they almost fired John Matt, because they said, you can't talk about aliens at Harvard. This is, of course, William James was talking about that 100 years ago, but,
And Avi Loeb is doing it now.
That's right. That's right. And Timothy Leary, who knows what he was talking about, but he was at Harvard.
There's okay, once you grok all that, and this idea that like academia is never going to get it, government isn't going to get it. Just hop the ship, man. Screw this. This place, I can't take it anymore. I know, Kat, I so appreciate your perspective. It's like, yes, what are we creating? And I really, I really want to be participating in that creation of, Alan, this new reality, this new consciousness of cosmic galactic relationships, right? Like how ridiculous it, Sean, who was it that said this broad range of 5 to 35 different species? Excuse me, it's just that is so insane in the face of the galaxy and the universe. Anyway, I get so excited, but I just say, leave him behind, man. Let's just
No,
go.
But he's in academia. How are you going to talk to the rationalists that think we're all pre-rational, superstitious, primitive minds in that way?
Right, but that asking that question of like, how are you going to do that suggests that you want to.
Well, he's dealing with them.
I back up and I'm like, it's not going to work. Like, I give up.
Trying to convert the world. Come on, we're trying to wake humanity. We have to deal with that, Nadi. What do you think?
John's got it, man. I don't.
Well,
no, okay, I'll finish that. I'll answer that realistically. My approach, we've got this incredible brain power. I'm being a little snarky because of my own frustration and primitive situation right now. But my solution is my inner work, my personal development, and my ability to emanate that energetic capacity. And then that's influence uplifts and shifts consciousness. And it doesn't need words. It doesn't need convincing. It's simply presence that is cultivated out of our inner work. That's my sincere answer. And I just get frustrated with humanity. So that's it.
I think and many of us, we find ourselves in both earths, right? Like I really appreciated what Kat was saying. It's like, I live in the new earth and I live in the old earth, right? And so I'm kind of caught between them, and I'm choosing to be between them, right? And seeing what I can do to kind of be a bridge so that, people who are in the old earth and intuit a different possibility, intuit a wider cosmology, and a more expanded multidimensional reality, that they can kind of go, oh, okay, over here, right? And so that's why it's like having this like little, this program, a PhD program. It's like kind of a pretty inconsequential on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, it's this totally radical, possibility. It's like, it's just one little program out of thousands, and yet it's a place where people who want to engage in this in an academic way and get a doctorate can go there, right? And then they can be part of helping to shift that paradigm. Right. And so I think, we all have so many different roles to play on so many different aspects of all of this. Right. And it's like, it's exciting to really honor the strengths and gifts that each of us have to like contribute to either trying to fix the fear earth, or just trying to like be in the new earth. Right. Or trying to like kind of somehow navigate, between those.
Well, that
will
would,
it ever?
Yes
Oh,
and
go
no.
ahead,
I
Kat.
mean, there's the old earth, the new earth, but really it's not just the two. It's infinite in between there. So
Right.
don't limit yourself to think that it's only an old earth and a new earth.
Yeah.
So,
No, but the new earth includes, if you're going to do that, the model that like the conversion in a sense that Court went through. He was open-minded enough to take the course, but then went through the birth canal to be born again, in a sense.
Yeah.
Right. So that's new. But how do you? You're a bridge, Sean, and maybe it's what Werner was it Heisenberg? No, Werner something Planck. The guy who Planck, who's what's the first name? He said science progresses one funeral at a time. So it's like this is the academia based on linear, mechanical, logical thinking is essentially not going to get the UAP nonlinear ontological possibilities that you're presenting. Would you think that?
I think there will be some that just will never come along, right? They just, it's too much too fast, and it's just like they're just not going to accept it. But I think there are many who will, right? And it's interesting. A few months ago, Sam Harris was on a few podcasts, and in 3 separate occasions, basically said, something to the effect that he's been contacted by people connected to the government, connected to the UAP issue, and who are asking him to play a role as a public intellectual with helping people to normalize to the reality of not just UAP craft, but also ET and ED presences. And so if a move like that happened in kind of the kind of mainstream context, like if there was 1, 2, 3, 4 people like Sam Harris who came out and basically said, and Sam, even in his comments said, we're going to have to apologize, to all the experiencers, like we got it wrong for many years. Someone like that could do a lot to shift the public conversation and really give a lot of the people who are on the fence or who intuit these new possibilities permission to really kind of shift over to that. And that could be a quantum moment, right? Like that could really shake things up in a good way.
But you look at, go ahead.
I want to plug really quick. Some of us are meant to be in the spotlight, and some of us are meant to be behind the scenes, and we all figure out our contribution and our strength. And Sean, your intellectual breadth is so astonishing on some level. And I just want to add, one of the take homes for me was your ability, comes back to the holding it lightly and taking it seriously. And in terms of the multiple, infinite amount of worlds, you have a strength and a capacity. And my experience of you is that you did spend so much time building that spiritual base, the head, the heart, and the hara, as you talk about, and you have this embodiment of balance. And that was so potent. And it was, there's so much information, and your presence and holding was its own inspiring teacher, and I can't think of a better person to be the ambassador in the, in the academia, and because you hold both so well. And so I'm just, one of my strengths here is I brought you to Alan, so, and we'll just, just more and more support of you and what you're doing is my goal, but I can't talk you up enough. It's been really great.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. But how would you talk to someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson? If you've heard, no, I'm serious. He is like the leading scientist, and he was on, I think, CNN, and he said, someone asked him about what the Nimitz pilots saw, and he sort of said, well, those are just probably artifacts on the radar, and, why isn't, and it was a total denial, and actually a put down of people who would be open and seeing, including Fravor and the pilots. I mean, and, Bud Hopkins would often say, I knew him, the job of science is to investigate the unexplained, but most scientists explain the uninvestigated. So how do you talk to someone like Tyson, deGrasse Tyson and people?
Yeah.
Like that?
I think it's helpful. There's a scholar in New Zealand he's like in media studies or sociology. I'm forgetting his name right now, but he's done some great work in looking at, it's called, there's a sociological term for basically, it's like maintaining the boundary, right? That like a public intellectual, like Degrasse says, like basically maintaining this kind of false boundary between science and rational, and so he's kind of locked into that role and position. So to an extent, I don't know how much you can do with someone like that. And, it's because he just seems to really show no capacity or interest or curiosity. But you take someone like Kaku, right? Who used to always say, steal an ashtray from the ship, right? And it was kind of this ongoing joke he had, which I always found a bit annoying. But he's now coming out and saying now the burden of proof is on, it's like it's shifted, right? So like he's really great because he's showing his flexibility of thought and his ability to shift as more data is coming in, right? And so I think Degrasse lacks that, right, in a way that Kaku has.
Well, are you looking to Elizondo and Mellon to sort of lead the charge? Not just academically or intellectually, but publicly. I mean, that's who I'm looking toward. And if we're going to go to public acceptance, of course, we don't need something like that to know it's real. But for the mainstream, are you looking to them?
I am increasingly feeling good about who they are and the role they're playing, and I feel that I think they're really fighting the good fight. And I feel they're going to play a big role in what's to come in terms on that side of the street in that process with the government and the Pentagon. I'm really hoping for congressional hearings. I think that is an important and natural step And if we get to that point, it's going to, and we really can, call witnesses to the stand and really, basically have like, the 2001 Disclosure Project with Greer and the 2013 Citizens Hearing with Bassett. If we can just redo that in the context of a congressional hearing, I mean, by the time we do the hearings, it's going to be 25-year-old news, right? But it's like,
are we even around 25 years from now? Like what?
Well, no, like if it happens in the next couple of years, it'll be,
I was there in Washington in 2013 for the 5 days, and it was a game changer Steve Bassett paid these former congressional members to sit on a panel, listen to 40 UFO experts come forward. And for the first couple of days, you knew they were getting paid to do. Somehow on day 3, there was this like awakening saying, wow, is this true? Is this really happening? You could see something was lit up in them where they were no longer there for the money, but they were there because something unusual and real happened and they wanted to know what it was, right?
Yeah. So I think Mellon and Elizondo, I'm rooting for them, and I think, they're one part of it, right? I think, there's many fronts to this process, and the experiencers and, it's going to take a lot of people doing a lot of things. But I think there's a lot of promising things happening on their end.
Right. And plus there's the side where the people who I put in the book, researchers, Grant Cameron and Linda Moulton Howe and Richard well, he's not in the book, but Whitley Strieber, who says he doesn't think they'll ever touch the abduction topic in Congress, but maybe they will. I mean, we have to lay down all that groundwork before they get there.
Groundwork. You're planting seeds is what you're doing.
Right. Yes, it's true. That's humbling. But Elizabeth would jump in and say, like, well, no, this is my spin on the trauma issue and the planetary trauma. Like, we can't even get together about the fact that we belong, we are connected, we depend on our planet. Like, we can't even do that. How are we going to get congressional hearings about abduction? I'm really pessimistic today. It's fascinating to see this.
I don't think the hearings will be on abductions as much as just on the science and nuts and bolts.
Okay.
At least first, they might get to that.
But if we look at the free survey, the Foundation for the Research of Extraordinary and Extraterrestrial Experiences, that Ray Hargens, and others did, they surveyed, 4,000 experiencers from around the planet, and only 30% of them reported negative or abduction-like experiences. So, but obviously our media, really goes to town with the scary grays coming into your bedroom at night. And, and so not to downplay the trauma of all of that, but I think there's a process we need to go through where we first just recognize there are a lot of different kinds of interactions that are happening. There's a wide range, good, bad, indifferent, neutral, negative, even evil, angelic, like there's just so much, like you would have with any set of people interacting with any other set of people. It's like, so I think when we focus on the encounters and the wide range of encounters, and we then situate the more negative encounters within that larger context, I think it's going to make it easier to understand and to talk about. Right. Like if we get hyper focused on just the negative encounters, I think it plays into the fear, into the threat, into a lot of things. And as Max, approach pointed out, though people don't always agree with it, that even those who had, arguably very negative experiences often came to relate to them, and not to minimize the negative experiences, but as a deeply transformative and powerful experience. So it's a very complex topic, right? But there is trauma. There is a lot of trauma that also needs to be talked about and made room for. And if you look at what's happened just in the last 5 years around somatic therapies and trauma therapies, we've had major, deeper understandings about how to work with and heal trauma. And I don't think that's by coincidence. I think that's helping us to recognize and deal with all kinds of trauma, the UFO ET just being one layer of that.
Well, have you read Matthew Roberts' book, Initiated, where he goes through? Do you know who he is?
No. No, I'll
That's
check it out.
great. He was on one of those ships, not the Nimitz, but the Roosevelt, I think, where they did start to see these things. And it just opened something up in him. Matthew Roberts initiated. I recommend it because he works through, he realizes there are UFOs and he starts to encounter these beings and he's horrified and traumatized until he does some kind of inner work where he makes peace with the phenomenon, and then it all changes. Then they become like divine beings and they open up and they kind of, he kind of has a transcendental experience. The same thing happened to Chris Bledsoe. You know the Chris Bledsoe story.
Yeah.
He's seeing divine beings now, like divine feminine beings, the embodiment of this woman he calls the lady. And so there is, I don't understand how it goes from one to the other. There's something there that's confronting our sense of being that is transforming the abductions into, like you say in that study, into, like, if I wasn't traumatized by my abduction or had that opening, I may have just been like a lawyer or an accountant. No, I don't think so. But something really exciting, even with that trauma, has ignited a greater mind and imagination for me to pursue the unknown, because it's so hard to fathom this other sense of reality. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and this is where, Jacques Vallée and John Keel and many others have pointed to the evolutionary catalyst that the phenomenon is, right? That it seems part of what it's doing is it's evolving us and our consciousness through our interaction with it. And I think these are, really good examples of one way that manifests, right? And to Kat's point, it's like, we draw to us, in a sense, kind of whatever our consciousness and mind is focusing on, right? And so, that's, I think, and this is why I talk about the mutual enactment hypothesis. I think we need a model of how these different intelligences, how we interact and co-create and co-manifest, and not just in like a cultural or subjective sense, like in a literally physical, sense as well. And that's something the phenomena keeps showing, the way it comes into physical reality and goes out of physical reality. So it's helping us loosen our understanding of the way different physical 3D phenomenon and realities can come into being, in ways that are much more dynamic than what we often assume or recognize.
Right. Well, I want to ask Kat, when you're communicating with animals or maybe having some other altered state experience, what's your reference to this world? I mean, how do you bridge those two worlds where most people don't talk to animals or, have these kind of multi-dimensional experiences?
We're all multi-dimensional beings. So it's really a blending of practice, really, because so you can feel the physical heavy body or heavier body and being able to just switch your awareness very quickly. But it's practice. I mean, certainly years ago, it would definitely take me like, okay, let me get into it. Let me practice and be like my eyes closed forever, trying to switch that. But when you realize that it's just, you are that, you're blending with everything. I'm blending here with my wall, with everything in my room, with the consciousness of the animals, with my dogs and my cat, with the plants. It's a nice easy blend. It's not difficult when you practice that and realize that we are multidimensional. But I feel like, if you think that you're so separate from everything else, that's where it's too difficult. That's where you can't do it. It reminds me of, I'm sorry, you're muted, hon.
I said even people have crossed over in all that realm, the astral and all that. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I kind of also say it, remember those old pictures that you'd look at it and then you'd kind of have to almost like squint your eyes or cross your eyes to see the other picture within it. It's kind of like that, but pretty soon once you got it, it was very easy to see. You just look, they had posters and books and you'd, look and you'd see the same picture. What did you say, Nadi?
No, that was my computer talking. That was
computer.
another
I heard
reality.
But
Interfacing.
really, it's really about we're all connected, right? So if we're all connected, we're all multidimensional. It's just a little switch of the awareness to be able to do that, and that goes across the board for animals, for plants, for ETs or other multidimensional beings. So it's practice is really what I would say, but it's not just practice; it's an awareness. Knowing that. But if you think that you're not multidimensional and you're just this physical heavy body, then that's where the difficulty comes in.
Right. Sean, I don't know how much time you have. I appreciate it, but I just want to ask you, because you are smart, you've read all the books, you've put it together. There must be, I would guess, a cosmology in your own inner mind that where you make sense of it all, not in linear, but where you put it all together, because you have put it all together so you can interrelate it to yourselves. I'm just curious, what is that cosmology? How does it all fit in for you in that realm?
Yeah, I feel the indigenous cosmologies have a really good starting point with this, because those are cosmologies that include room for, all those different beings that were listed in that chart from that article that I wrote, right? It's like that they don't have a problem with acknowledging that wide range of different types of beings and intelligences. So I feel the indigenous cosmologies, offer a lot for us kind of expanding our scientific cosmology to include that. But it's a very dynamic, multidimensional multiverse, right? It's like there's so, like, my sense of cosmology is so kind of radical and like open-ended, and like it makes room for a lot, and it makes room for a lot of paradox, right? Like I don't need things to come together and tie themselves up in a nice little bow. Like I think it's much more creative and mysterious than that, right? And so, and it's not that like anything goes, but at the same time, it's true. Anything goes, it's like, and it's like, it's the divine just finding so many different ways to differentiate and express itself, to know itself, right? In this unending kind of labyrinth of being, right? And, and so I feel really drawn to helping people expand their cosmology to include a much wider range of non-human intelligences, because I feel like by developing a cosmology that allows there to be nature spirits and Sasquatch and ghosts and, a wide range of ETs and angelic beings, like, I think that invites us into a whole different story about who we are and who we can be, right? And so I really want to be participating in a cosmology that is dynamic, creative, filled with love, and expresses itself through such a wide range of intelligence that it's unfathomable, right? Like, so that would maybe be my initial summary of my cosmology.
No, I love it, and it's probably the most exciting question or interest of our time. I can't think of anything more exciting than trying to integrate an unknown reality into an advancement of conscious awareness.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's why, I titled the, 50-some page article that I was showing everyone earlier, Our Wild Cosmos. Like, it's a wild cosmos. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of different ways it expresses itself. And we're just beginning to wake up to that, right? And so it's like we live in this highly populated cosmos with all kinds of intelligences expressing themselves, and we're in relationship with them.
The person who called me just before was Whitley Strieber. He just called me I said, come on. He said he couldn't, but it's so that was, I hardly talked to him. I mean, occasionally, but he was just calling me to say hello.
He tapped into the fields. He knew what was going on. Whitley's awesome. Yeah.
He's a big part. I mean, if you look at his body of work, he's one of the more lucid conscious contactees that, right? Did you read A New Earth? No,
New World.
yeah, A New World.
I loved it. Yeah. And, some of the parts that were really powerful for me in that book is like when he's basically in two places at one time, right? When he's on the Indian reservation and it's like there's this bleed through to this other earth, if you will.
I was there with him. I know. I was sitting next to him and he says, do you see what I'm saying? I said, no, Whitley, I wish I did. But yeah.
Yeah. So to me, is a very powerful reminder of us, how we live in this multidimensional multiverse.
Right. That's what Kat was saying, because she's integrated. I'm sorry she left, because I think she, if the world could be like that, that living in those multiple realities at once, I think we'd all get along much better with each other and we'd have that peaceful world. So anybody else? I mean, I could go on and on, but I'd love to invite you to some panel discussions I do and some other conferences, and you could present and also discuss. I just was in discussion with Paul Hynek, the son of J. Allen Hynek. So I think, and he's very open, and he's also a rationalist too. So I'd love to hear your conversation with that. So what's next for you? Oh, go ahead, Nadi. What are you going to say?
I just want to jump in because I'm out of time. But I want to, it's so wonderful to have this sort of reactivation, Sean. The community we've enjoyed each other so much that we've kept going past the class, and we just have these meetups once a week, and it's really stimulating to keep all of this alive. And I'm just realizing, Sean, like I feel like that year was preparatory and I could do it again, and I'm like kind of get it now. You opened so many doors, and I'm sort of kidding, but thank you. And thank you, Alan, for the platform to broaden the word on this, and Court. And I know Elizabeth's gone, but Michael, it's so good to have a crowd, and talk together.
Well, I knew I wanted to talk to Sean when you started to talk about him and said you took this class, and it's like, yeah, this is someone who really knows the territory. And it's just study. Anyone who's looked at the literature you looked at would be more than convinced there's a reality here. It's like just most people are just not open. They just want to know what they know, and they stay within this very small framework. Michael, were you going to say something, Michael? Or Court? I guess Court left us. Anyway, what are you looking? Oh, Court, did you have something to say before we wrap up? No? Thanks so much for being here. And Nadi, of course, and Michael. But so Sean, where are you off to? What is your next phase of development for your work and this?
A number of things. And thank you again, Nadi, for connecting me with Alan and being here tonight. So there's the PhD program, so we're just launching that and really want to develop that.
Out of where? People watching, where can they sign up for the PhD program?
Yeah, so the URL is www.cihs.edu. So it's the California Institute for Human Science, right? And it's
is that accredited college? I mean, is that
it's accredited grad school. So you can get a master's or a PhD in integral noetic sciences. And then within that program, we have a concentration in anomalous studies. And then we also have an individualized design concentration that you can work with me to create your own kind of focus if it's, falls outside of that.
And where's it located?
In San Diego, but most students are virtual. So it's an online and campus-based program.
And where are you based out of?
I'm in Maine. So I'm on the East
Maine.
Coast.
You're on the East Coast.
Started out in California, moved during the course to Maine.
Are you on the coast of Maine, or are you inland in Maine?
No,
the coast.
Yeah, I'm a big sea kayaker, so I try and get out every week or so.
Oh, Maine is just fantastic. There's that famous case, of course, in Allagash, Maine.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
A fantastic case. I mean, those guys are still around too.
Yeah.
So you're building your PhD program for students, and then what else are you doing as far as?
So early next year, so probably like February or March I'm going to be launching a 6-month course on cultivating multidimensional awareness. And so kind of, the EXO studies year-long course was kind of like the theory. And then this is going to be like a practice course where we really, work with our own awareness and work with a set of different practices to, cultivate contact and communion. So that's forthcoming. And then I'm wanting to do like a 10-year research project on people who have anomalous experiences. So I want to kind of build on the free research and basically, do an ongoing, qualitative and quantitative study so we can really better document the kind and range of experiences people have and the kinds of beings they interact with, and really bring kind of a good psychological, sociological, academic orientation to that work. And I'm working on a couple manuscripts for books. And
but just as far as that academic tenure, have you looked at Kit Green's work and Gary Nolan about the markers in the brain that show up in different contactees? Have you looked at that?
Yeah. So
Okay.
all right,
Okay,
bye now.
Bye.
Bye. Does that make sense to you, that brain markers?
I'm interested in trying to study that and validate that or identify additional markers or other. So those are a lot of the big projects. And then the academic consortium for UAP and EXO studies, right? To really help kind of bring academics from around the world together, in a network, a virtual space, so that we can support each other and applying our academic disciplines to EXO studies, to the study of the interface of consciousness and, EXO realities.
Let me know when you want to do that, because I'll contact Mark Sims, the Making Contact, and we could do that virtually on the Making Contact campus.
Great.
And so if you want to do that next couple of months, like a kind of introductory academic discussion, we could probably hold it on the campus there. I'll ask them. But
okay, great. Yeah, I know Zenka, and I've met Mark.
Zenka, yes. Have you met Mark?
Yeah. He was very impressed. He wanted to take the EXO Studies course, but we were like halfway through, and he decided to wait. So we've had a little contact.
Right. Well, he's taken the name for the campus from my book, Making Contact Campus.
Right.
So I think that would be great to house academics. Do you know Eric Weinstein? Have you been in touch with him at all? Have you?
No, but I know him and his work.
Well, he just said he was doubted the UFO thing for a long time until, and now he's come around, and he hasn't read the literature. He's not as well versed. So he may be an intellectual, but he's not, in my opinion, accessing the scope of knowledge and asking the questions someone who's looked at the work needs to have. So, but thanks. And how do I I'll get your information from Nadia. I'll reach out for.
Great.
Are you busy? I guess you're busy a lot, right?
Because I'm also I run a consulting company, and so it's like, and family, kids, so that full deal.
Oh, you have family and kids and everything, and wow.
3 dogs, 1 cat.
Are you up by Arcadia in that area?
We're 3 hours away from Arcadia, but we love it there, and we're going there in a couple weeks to see the leaves turning.
Are you north of Arcadia or south of Arcadia?
No, south. We're near Portland.
Oh, okay. That's a nice little town. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, anything you want to say before we sign off here? But I appreciate everything you've been saying.
Just thank you, Sean. Thanks for all of your work and for your intelligence and for your contribution and for your erudition. Appreciated.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, and hope that you'll come back sometime.
Yeah, anytime we do these discussions with different people. Grant Cameron's been on the show, Carolyn Corey. I want to have Whitley Strieber on. Have you met Whitley in person or
not in person? We had him join us for a course I was doing with someone else. So, have had contact with him, and we have a couple shared friends, and Whitley and I are going to be at a conference together at Esalen in December with Jeff Kripal and a few others. So so excited to connect with him more there.
Great, great. Well, thank you for everything you're doing. I was developing a course too for like a local college on everything I've put together.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Yeah. So, thanks. So maybe let's talk, and I definitely want to have you. Oh, I'm part of the Evolutionary Leaders, which is connected to, it's a crossover with some of the Institute of Noetic Science people. So maybe you could talk to them, the Source of Synergy Circle, maybe in January or something, or December possibly, to talk to them about laying out this big scope, because I think they'd appreciate, because a lot of them are Wilbur people, Wilbur oriented. Kurt Johnson is there. He's a big Wilbur person. So, and they're very open to these exo discussions. So, hey, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Alan. Really enjoyed connecting. Really appreciated the quality of facilitation and the way you engaged me and everyone else. And it was just really delightful to be here. So excited to continue to be in relationship and just see how we can keep moving things forward.
Well, I think this is the most exciting topic to talk about in the world. And you're someone who can talk about it on the level of excitement, but also the search to solve the mystery. If it's even, there is a huge puzzle here, and no one, not me, not anyone has been able, not the government for sure, has been able to connect the dots, because there's so many puzzle pieces missing. Linda Moulton House says this is like a house of mirrors on a quicksand moving floor. It's like nothing to grasp on because it keeps dissolving. Have you been in contact with Linda at all?
No, I would love to. She's one of my heroes. So at some point I look forward to that.
She is one of the top of the line. I'll connect you if you want to reach out to her.
Please, that would be great.
All right, be in touch. We'll exchange information through Nadi. Thank you, everyone online who's watching. We'll be back next week, and come join us any week if you're open on Wednesdays. Michael, thanks for joining. And everyone in the chat, thanks for your time here. And you can always take out a super chat if you're listening on YouTube and support the station. So in this channel, I'm Alan Steinfeld for New Realities. Get my book. Let me know what you think of it, Sean, when you get a chance. It's a good textbook because it's an overview from the nuts and bolts to the hardcore conscious aspect of. So I go from the exo to the eso, from the exoteric to the esoteric. So, all right.